It clears the air, restores agency, and prevents lies from festering unchecked. I learned that loyalty isn't always about keeping secrets or preserving appearances. True loyalty is about standing for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it risks everything you thought you knew about family. And now, as I reflect, I hope anyone who finds themselves holding a painful truth understands this: don't let fear dictate your silence. Protecting someone's comfort over their right to know the truth isn't kindness, it's betrayal. Emily sat at the table and didn't even look at me. She knew I knew. And she knew I was silent. That was the most terrifying thing, the realization that my silence had become a shield for her. That by protecting the family peace, I was actually covering up my betrayal. I used to think that silence was neutrality. That I was simply keeping out of it. But at that moment, for the first time, I clearly understood: when you know the truth and remain silent, you're already on someone else's side. And it wasn't my brother's side. From the outside, Mark and Emily's marriage looked effortless. The kind people pointed to and said, "That's what a good marriage looks like." They never fought in public. Never raised their voices. Emily laughed at all the right moments, touched Mark's arm when she spoke, posted carefully chosen photos that made their life look warm and balanced. Weekend brunches. Matching smiles. Anniversary captions about my person. Our family adored her. She's so supportive. She keeps him grounded. Mark is lucky. And Mark believed it more than anyone. He talked about her like she was proof he'd done life right. Like marrying Emily meant he'd won something. He trusted her completely, not blindly, but proudly. He liked to say they didn't need passwords between them because there's nothing to hide. People nodded at that, impressed. Even I questioned myself at times. That's how convincing it was. Emily knew exactly how to play the role. She asked about everyone's parents, remembered birthdays, brought wine to dinners, never complained. If there was tension, she smoothed it over before anyone noticed. If Mark was stressed, she became patient and calm, in front of others. That was the part no one saw clearly. Everything about their marriage was designed to be seen. So when doubts flickered, subtle, quiet, uncomfortable, they were easy to dismiss. Because nothing looked broken, nothing sounded wrong. And when a marriage looks that perfect, the idea that something rotten is growing underneath feels almost offensive. That illusion protected her longer than any lie ever could. Looking back now, the signs were there, just quiet enough to ignore. Emily guarded her phone like it was an extension of her body. Screen always down. Notifications silenced. If Mark picked it up to check the time, she'd casually reach for it with a laugh, like it was nothing. Everyone joked about it. She's just private. I laughed too. She started working late more often. Nothing dramatic, just enough to sound responsible. Important calls she had to take outside. Errands that suddenly took an extra hour. When Mark mentioned it, she kissed his cheek and said, "You know how things are right now." And that was enough. There were moments when conversation stopped the second I entered the room. Not rushed, controlled. As if they'd practiced switching subjects smoothly. I noticed the way Emily sometimes watched me instead of listening, measuring my reactions. I told myself I was imagining it. Even her kindness felt strategic. Compliments that landed slightly off. Questions that dug just a bit too deep into what Mark shared with me. At the time, I thought she was just trying to be close. To be family. Once, at a dinner, someone joked about infidelity, harmless, stupid humor. Emily smiled, but her jaw tightened for half a second. I caught it. I remember thinking, that was strange. Then I let it go. That's the thing about red flags: when they belong to someone everyone loves, they don't wave. They whisper. And when you don't want to be the person who ruins a perfect picture, you teach yourself not to hear them. There were moments when the truth sat right on my tongue, heavy and burning, and I almost let it slip. Once, Mark asked me casually if I thought Emily seemed stressed lately. Just an innocent question. He was worried about her, not suspicious. My heart started racing. I could have said something then. Even a hint. But I saw the trust in his face, open, unguarded, and I panicked. I told him everyone goes through phases. He nodded, relieved. I hated myself for how easily that lie came out. Another time, Emily cancelled plans last minute and Mark tried to laugh it off. I caught the disappointment in his eyes when he turned away. I remember thinking, if you knew why, you wouldn't be smiling right now. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to be responsible. There was a night I barely slept, replaying everything in my head. I even typed out a message to Mark. Just a few careful sentences. No accusations. No drama. I stared at the screen until sunrise, then deleted it. Cowardice felt safer than consequences. Family gatherings made it worse. Watching them together, her hand on his knee, his arm around her shoulders. It felt almost cruel. Like I was complicit in a performance he hadn't agreed to be part of. Each time I stayed silent, I told myself I was protecting him. Protecting the family. Protecting peace. What I didn't realize yet was that silence doesn't protect anyone. It just gives lies more time to settle in, and grow roots. Silence wasn't a single decision. It was something I chose over and over, in smaller, quieter ways. I told myself it wasn't my marriage. That I didn't have proof, just patterns and instincts. I convinced myself that being wrong would be worse than being quiet, that if I spoke up and destroyed something that wasn't actually broken, I'd never forgive myself. Emily counted on that fear. She didn't need to threaten me. She just smiled, acted normal, and let my doubt do the work for her. The family helped too, without realizing it. Every time someone said how lucky Mark was, how solid their marriage seemed, it felt like a warning not to interfere. I didn't want to be labeled dramatic or jealous or bitter. I'd seen how quickly families turn on the person who disrupts the story everyone prefers to believe. And selfishly, I was tired. Tired of being the one who causes uncomfortable conversations. Tired of being responsible for emotional fallout I didn't create. Silence felt like the least destructive option, a way to step back and let things resolve themselves. I told myself the truth would come out on its own. That lies eventually collapse. That it wasn't my job to push. What I didn't understand then was that by choosing silence, I wasn't staying neutral. I was choosing a side, and it wasn't his. The truth didn't come out gently. It never does when it's been buried too long. I wasn't there when it happened, which somehow made it worse. Mark found out on his own, in the most brutal way possible. Emily had been careless, maybe tired of hiding, maybe convinced she was untouchable. A message popped up on her phone while it was sitting on the kitchen counter. Explicit. Familiar. Not something that could be explained away. He called me that night. He didn't accuse. He didn't even ask questions at first. He just said, "I think Emily is cheating on me," in a flat, hollow voice that didn't sound like my brother at all. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what he had seen. I knew how long this had been going on. And I knew, in that moment, that my silence had stolen his chance to face it sooner. Everything unraveled fast after that. The confrontation. The denials that lasted only minutes. The sudden shifting stories. The tears that appeared too late to mean anything. Emily swore it was a misunderstanding, then a mistake, then nothing serious. Each version contradicted the last. Mark didn't yell. That scared me more than anger ever could. He just listened, like someone watching a building collapse in slow motion, realizing too late that he'd been living inside it. And I stood on the other end of the phone, realizing the truth hadn't needed my permission to surface, it had just waited until it could do the most damage. At first, the family didn't react, not really. There was this strange pause, like everyone was waiting for someone else to explain it away. Then came the confusion. That doesn't sound like Emily comments. The forced laughter, as if this were a misunderstanding that would clear itself up by morning. My mom kept saying there had to be a mistake. My aunt asked if Mark was sure he'd seen what he thought he saw. No one wanted details. Details make things real. When Emily finally admitted it, or at least a version of it, the shock turned into something messy. Some people went quiet, others immediately started damage control. Marriages go through rough patches. It didn't have to mean anything. Why is this being blown up? What stunned me most was how quickly the focus shifted away from Mark. Suddenly, the concern was about embarrassment. About how this would look. About holidays and shared friends and what people would say. Emily cried at the right moments. She talked about feeling lost. She apologized without really apologizing. Mark sat there, barely speaking, like he'd become invisible in his own crisis. And then the unspoken question started floating around the room, not what did she do? But who's going to keep this from getting worse? That's when I realized the shock wasn't about betrayal, it was about disruption. The truth hadn't just exposed Emily, it had exposed how uncomfortable everyone was with choosing a side at all. The realization didn't hit Mark all at once. It came in waves, each one quieter and heavier than the last. At first, he tried to rationalize it. He kept replaying conversations, looking for a version of reality where this made sense, where he'd misunderstood, where Emily hadn't meant it, where love could somehow absorb betrayal without changing shape. He told me he felt stupid for even being upset. That should have been my first clue how deep the damage went. Then the questions started. Not about her, but about himself. When did I stop being enough? How long did everyone else know? Was I the only one in the dark? Every question carried this underlying fear that his entire life had been built on something false. One night he broke down in a way I'd never seen before. No anger. No yelling. Just this quiet, shaking grief that came from realizing the person you trusted most never existed in the way you believed. He said he felt like he'd been living someone else's life, smiling through moments that were already hollow. And then came the regret, not just about marrying her, but about defending her. About brushing off concerns. About choosing comfort over clarity. He told me the hardest part wasn't the cheating itself. It was knowing how long he'd protected the lie without realizing it. Watching my brother collapse like that, I finally understood something brutal. Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It rewrites the past, and leaves you grieving memories you can never be sure were real. The guilt didn't arrive loudly. It settled in slowly, like something that had been waiting for permission. I started replaying every moment I'd stayed quiet, every time I'd chosen comfort over honesty, and suddenly they all felt different. They weren't neutral anymore. They were choices. And those choices had consequences that now sat in front of me, in the form of my brother barely holding himself together. I realized I hadn't just stayed out of it. I'd helped maintain the illusion. Every smile at family dinners. Every time I reassured Mark without meaning it. Every time I let Emily's version of reality stand unchallenged. I wasn't just a bystander, I'd been part of the system that protected the lie. The worst moment came when Mark asked me, very quietly, if I had ever suspected anything. I didn't answer right away. The silence between us stretched, heavy and accusing. He didn't push. That somehow hurt more. In that pause, I understood something painful. Silence doesn't erase responsibility. It just delays accountability. I had told myself I was avoiding damage, but all I'd really done was let it grow bigger, sharper, harder to survive. I wasn't the one who betrayed him, but I had helped betrayal last longer than it should have, and that truth was harder to sit with than any anger directed at me would have been. Emily didn't panic when Mark stopped defending her. She recalibrated. She became gentler in front of the family, softer voice, longer hugs, carefully timed tears. She spoke about miscommunication and how hard marriage can be, never about lying. Never about choices. Everything was vague, floating, impossible to pin down. But alone, with me, the performance changed. She told me I was strong for staying quiet. That I understood how fragile Mark was. That not everyone could be trusted with the truth. She framed my silence as loyalty, as proof I wasn't like those people who destroy families just to feel righteous. When I didn't agree, her eyes hardened. Just for a second. Long enough. She warned me, softly, that once something is said, it can't be unsaid. That Mark would never look at me the same way. That I'd become the reason everything fell apart. That's when it clicked. This wasn't fear. It was confidence. She wasn't trying to avoid consequences, she was trying to manage them. She believed she could still control the narrative, still decide who spoke and who stayed quiet. In that moment, I understood something terrifying. Emily didn't see silence as mercy. She saw it as obedience. And she was used to being obeyed. The story started changing before the truth even fully settled. Suddenly, everyone remembered things. Comments they'd brushed off. Moments that now felt off. My mom said she'd always felt Emily was a little too perfect. An aunt claimed she'd noticed tension years ago. Even people who had once shut me down for questioning anything now spoke with the confidence of hindsight. I had a feeling, they said. I just didn't want to interfere. I didn't think it was my place. It was strange, watching the same silence that had protected Emily now being repackaged as wisdom. When I reminded them how strongly they'd warned me to stay quiet, how they'd told me I was overreacting, they waved it away. That was different, they said. This was obvious now. Everyone could see it. There was no point in blaming anyone. But that was the problem. No one wanted responsibility. Not for staying silent. Not for pressuring me. Not for protecting the illusion longer than it deserved. Mark heard all of it. I watched his face as the narrative shifted around him, rewriting years of certainty into something flimsy and dishonest. The truth hadn't just exposed Emily, it exposed how easily we all adjusted reality to make ourselves feel innocent. And in that moment, I realized something else: families don't just hide lies. They reshape them, so no one has to admit they helped keep them alive. Something changed after that, not loudly, not all at once, but unmistakably. People started looking at me differently. The same relatives who once told me to stay out of it now asked what I had seen, what I had known, how long I had suspected something. My silence, once framed as maturity, suddenly became insight. As if restraint had been intentional wisdom instead of fear. It was uncomfortable. I hadn't earned authority, I'd inherited it through collapse. When Emily realized this, she noticed too. Conversation stopped when I entered the room. Her casual confidence around me disappeared. She no longer spoke for me or around me. She watched instead. Measured. Cautious. For the first time, I wasn't the one adjusting to keep the peace. The truth had shifted the balance. I was no longer a variable she could manage. Mark didn't thank me. He didn't blame me either. But when he spoke, he listened, really listened, like my words now mattered in a way they hadn't before. That hurt more than being dismissed ever had. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the moment people realize you can't be silenced anymore, and that they never should have tried. The truth didn't land cleanly. It shattered things on the way down. Emily didn't just lose her marriage, she lost the version of herself the family had believed in. The warmth people once offered her cooled into politeness, then distance. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations ended early. The reputation she'd curated so carefully didn't survive scrutiny. But the fallout didn't spare the rest of us either. Trust inside the family fractured in quiet, permanent ways. People started questioning motives, replaying old conversations, wondering who knew what, and when. The comfort of certainty was gone. We had all learned how easily loyalty could turn into avoidance. Some relatives blamed me, subtly. Not for lying, but for letting the truth surface at all. They never said it outright, but it lingered in their tone. Things had been easier before. Calmer. Pretending had cost less. Mark carried the heaviest weight. His grief wasn't dramatic. It was hollow. Watching someone you love realize their reality was built on falsehoods does something irreversible. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal, it rewrites how you see everyone around you. And I learned something sobering: truth doesn't just expose the betrayer, it exposes every relationship that depended on not looking too closely. Mark didn't fall apart the way everyone expected. He went quiet instead. He moved out, not dramatically, just efficiently: boxes, lists, silence. He started therapy. He stopped explaining himself to people who wanted quick forgiveness or neat conclusions. Healing, for him, wasn't loud or inspirational. It was slow and private and stubborn. I watched him rebuild in pieces. New routines. New boundaries. A version of himself that no longer needed to defend someone else's image. There was grief there, still, but also clarity. He wasn't trying to save a marriage anymore, he was trying to save himself. Emily, on the other hand, unraveled without an audience. Without Mark defending her, without the family buffering consequences, she lost control of the narrative. Her messages went unanswered. Her explanations grew longer, more frantic. She alternated between victimhood and blame, still trying to position herself at the center of the story. But no one was playing along anymore. What she never understood was this: control only works when people are willing to participate. Once silence breaks, manipulation has nothing to stand on. The aftermath wasn't justice or revenge. It was imbalance, one person learning to live honestly, and another realizing image can't survive without silence to protect it. I used to think loyalty meant protecting people from pain. I was wrong. What I was really protecting was comfort, mine, the family's, the version of peace that depends on not asking hard questions. Silence felt neutral. It felt safer than truth. But silence is never empty. It fills the space where accountability should live. Looking back, the betrayal didn't begin with the affair. It began the moment I decided it wasn't my responsibility to interrupt a lie I could see clearly. I told myself I was staying out of it. In reality, I was choosing a side, and it wasn't my brother's. Mark once told me that what hurt most wasn't just what Emily did. It was realizing how many people knew something was wrong and chose comfort over honesty. That knowledge changed how he sees family, trust, and love. It changed how I see myself too. If you're staying silent to protect the family, understand this: silence doesn't protect people. It protects patterns. It protects the person most invested in keeping the truth hidden. Truth is disruptive. It costs relationships. It rearranges power. But waiting doesn't make it kinder, it only makes the damage deeper. Silence is still a choice, and eventually, it always tells on you.